Hi, welcome to a new inaugural Education Matters video podcast that we just started today. I hope you enjoyed this afternoon. My name's Ray Pinney. I'll be your host. With me is David Aderhold, the superintendent of West Windsor, Plainsboro. We'll get into that conversation in a few minutes. Just if you want to participate in the conversation, we'll be talking about the teacher shortage today in New Jersey. Actually, it's a nationwide teacher shortage, but we'll be focusing on New Jersey. All you have to do is dial 609-278-5244, 609-278-5244. Janet's manning the phones, and she will get your information, and then we'll put you through eventually if you have a question for Dave or I. Or you can just put a comment in the Facebook or the YouTube account, and I'll see it, and we'll talk about it. So like I said before, we're going to be talking about the teacher shortage in New Jersey. We'll look at what it means in the classroom for our students, what it means for a local district, how we got here, and also how can we get out of it. I'm trying to do this all in 30 minutes, which I think is a little ambitious, but I've done it before. So Dave, why don't you first introduce yourself about the West Windsor Plainsboro district for those who don't know.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Ray, and to our guest joining. My name's Dave Aderhold, superintendent of West Windsor Plainsboro Regional School District. Spent the last 15 years there, 4 as assistant soup, deputy soup, the last 11 now as superintendent. Also involved with the New Jersey Association for New Jersey Administrative Association, so the NJSBA executive
I know
board.
Who they are.
Right, the executive board. Also past president Garden State Coalition. I had the chance to serve on the governor's task force for school staff shortages, and also chaired the NJSBA report for retention and recruitment.
So we all talk about the teacher shortage. But what does that really mean for a local district? What does it mean in terms of when you go out for applications for a position, and how have you seen it in the last 11 years?
Yeah, I think what we're all facing in the field is a devastating shortage, and what that looks like is it can be many things at different times in the year, but what we're often seeing right about now is we're seeing the future graduates applying and pending cert, and we're all in a mad rush to secure the new crop of teachers that are coming out. But very quickly, because the shortage is within that group, that's going to dry up, and then we're going to start trying to fill our vacancies by hiring one another's teachers. So we're solving the shortages by cannibalizing each other. We're often opening the year with vacancies or just filling. And then if you have any leaves, you're scrambling to try to figure out what that means. And there are districts that are sitting with vacancies right now in the state of New Jersey with openings for students in live time. Some districts over 100 vacancies right now. I'll not say their names out publicly, but there are districts with devastating shortages right now. What we're seeing in WWP is that the candidate pool has just declined rapidly. So we had a mid-year maternity leave that was a March 1st start. We knew of the expectation of the vacancy, and we had applied. We had to post in September. We didn't fill that until almost the end of the month of March. So even with all that lead time, there was not an applicant base that was sitting out there. And if you go back in time about a decade ago, a lot of times your substitutes would have teacher credentials. They're all employed now, or they're not in the workforce. So the shortages exist for lots of different reasons. But what it means to the field is that we're challenged to fill the openings for kids.
And you kind of alluded to it. There's not enough people in the students in the teacher prep programs. So the pool that we're pulling from is much smaller. How much smaller is it? Because I don't think people realize, and this has been happening not the last couple of years. This is going back.
Yeah, I know we have a graph that I don't know if it can be put up that shows the decline over time, but we used to have around 6,000 plus teaching candidates per year if you go back about a dozen years. Should be slight 3 or 4, I believe, about a dozen years. We're now graduating less than 3,000 applicants, almost 2,500 applicants per year. We can go through some data to sort of show what that looks like. But when you start looking at why that happened over that time period, there was a tremendous number of changes in pensions and benefit plans, and there was changes in salary caps. There was changes with 4% to 2%. There was changes in the praxis test for certification. there's been change after change, and majority of them still stand. TPA went in, it just left us a year ago. So when we start thinking about like why, there was an absolute disrespect towards educators about a decade ago, a prior administration. And you had Chapter 78, you had Teach NJ, you had the GPA changes, you had all these rule changes. And when you put that all together, less folks went into the system. But the most, probably, I think, in my estimation, the most devastating is the change in the pension. Right now, if you're a student graduating today, you don't have a defined plan. You can have a contributory policy, which you have to go to 65 to retire. So we're now talking a 44-year teaching career, and you have to contribute towards your benefits. And there's the math side of the equation with respect to making sure there's viability within the pension, and then there's the reality of if you're a college graduate today and you can work virtually and make more money, or you can work in the classroom and you're looking at that career experience, and then you look at your pension that maybe your parents were educators and they could retire at 55 and their benefits were covered, and now you're working 43 years to 65. It's a game changer.
Yeah. So, and also, I think when you said there seemed to be a negative attitude towards education, that some people maybe retire a year or two sooner than they originally had planned, kind of
Sure.
making it even worse.
Yeah, I do think that increased the retirees, but then COVID comes into play in the midst of all of this. And you have folks that also left the profession early. Moving to online was not something that a lot of us had been previously trained for. So there is that aspect, there's a health aspect, there's a quality of life aspect. And we do see folks that have left the profession and started to look at the net benefit and the differential of if I go at 53, if I go at 57 and start retiring.
Oh, okay. The phone number is 609-278-5244, 609-278-5244. So comment about recruiting teachers through colleges. I guess I'll get into that because that was one of the things. One of the programs, and look, I don't believe, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think an individual district can solve this. It's even hard to do it for themselves. But you have an interesting way of trying to recruit teachers from the colleges.
Yeah, so this is a brand new initiative in West Windsor, Plainsboro, and there's the three parts, right? There's the recruitment component, there's the training component, and the retention component. So when we start thinking in terms of something WWP just launched this year, we just launched an initiative to have paid student teaching. And look, we're looking this at a couple different ways. One is paid student teaching is a way to get a good look at the limited college graduates that are coming out. It's a good opportunity to build rapport and partnership with the universities. It's an opportunity to potentially handpick, because they're applying, handpick your candidate pool and look at your projected vacancies, which we're doing right now by looking at age of workforce, years in service, some contractual considerations in our district. And we know we have a pool of staff that are most likely going to retire in the next year. So we're trying to look at how do we solve that? So regionally, we have a couple feeding schools that send us our student teachers. And I really don't think this is really going to look and have too much of an impact outside of our region, because the reality is if you go to TCNJ or you go to Ryder, your student teaching is in a certain proximity from that university. I doubt someone from Montclair is coming down. In fact, 43 applicants in, and we have no applicants from Montclair, right? And that's because it's not realistic for their local environment. So we are looking at applicant pools, and we're trying to solve some of it by building relationships with our student teachers.
For those who don't know, student teachers don't get any stipend or anything, and so it's kind of they have to put a lot of hours in for getting credit.
Yeah, this came up during the governor's task force as a concept of how to try to encourage. It's an exorbitant cost for the colleges, as we all know, and a lot of times during student teaching, you cannot work. There's a huge commitment of hours. It's 600 or 700 of classroom hours plus all the prep work outside of the school. So a lot of times they have to stop working during that semester. For students that have financial hardships, they stop and they pull back, or they maybe exit the profession before they even start the profession. So it's a potential barrier into the profession. Pennsylvania has just launched an initiative for statewide paid student teaching. So there are models in the area. The HESA, the Higher Education Organization, has put a $3,000 stipend out there for student teachers. Whatever we offer will be separate and apart from HESA, so students could achieve both. We looked at it as a stipend because we didn't want to have an impact to financial aid applications for student teachers. It's one strategy, but when you look at recruitment, there's a lot of prongs to it. You have to get out there. You have to go to the job fairs. You have to go to the colleges. You have to continue to build relationships. I was at Ryder on Friday talking at their student teacher wrap up. Those kids are not students that are going to benefit from this. They're still trying to build relationships with the universities. And I think that schools and students want to work in a place that advocates and believes in and can be progressive, and they want to find a place that they belong. And we try to be one of those places that students want to go to.
I'm going to use your word cannibalism. You're trying to make your district stand out from the other districts. You're trying to get a leg up, but that still doesn't kind of increase the pool of candidates coming out of the colleges, unless it was done maybe statewide.
Well, sure. I mean, what you're seeing is, there's a couple slides in here that look at the 2020, 2021, and 2022 data, but we're seeing a successive decrease in the number of students that are graduating from student teaching colleges. So, we have these are completers in 2020, 27, just almost 2,800 total completers for their CEAS. 2021.
The CEAS.
It's a certificate of eligibility with advanced standing. Sorry, thanks for. There was just under 3,000 in 2021, and this past year it dropped to just under 2,100. Sorry, and then when you combine multiple certs, it actually is a little bit higher. It's about 2,600 this past year. It's about 3,400 the year before, and it's about 39 the year before. But why the decrease? Why do we keep seeing the decrease? Well, I mean, if you look at the cohort of kids graduating this year, they were high school graduates in 2020. We shut down school in March of 20 in order to go virtual. So they graduated finishing virtual. Next year's student teachers, next year's seniors in college are the first class that spent the majority of that senior year virtual, right? With little black boxes on Zoom or every other day in school. And one has to ask, did that inspire them to go on to become teachers? So the challenge in the devastating shortage was far predated COVID. And the field's been saying for years, we can't find physics, we can't find calculus, we can't find psychologists, we can't find social workers, we can't find world languages, French and Spanish, and I can find more Mandarin teachers than I can French teachers because Rutgers has a program. And so when you start looking at the field and start looking at, it's very program specific to what schools produce which candidates based on which professors and where can they fill and run programs. So there are colleges that don't have offerings. So TCNJ, the College of New Jersey, known as a teacher college, has shut down their health and PE program. They produce no health and PE candidates anymore.
I think we have to repeat that.
Yeah.
Because when you see these programs being closed down, there's not even an opportunity to recruit a student coming out of those programs because the programs are becoming fewer and far between.
Well, and that impacts you regionally as well.
Yeah.
So I'm better versed in the middle of the state just by proximity. I'm sure my colleagues in the north have similar issues with Montclair or Ramapo or Kane or others. So when a program goes away, the feeder for that region goes away. So there was TCNJ's World Language Spanish program closed about 7 or 8 years ago when the professor, a noted professor, retired. They just are reopening it in the next year. And we're seeing our first request for a student teacher in Spanish for spring of next year.
Wow.
But that 8-year gap of not producing Spanish teachers has hurt our entire region. Now we have to look at models outside of just, if we can't fill it from our colleges, we have to start saying, where do you get student teachers from? When the governor went to Taiwan, we now have an MOU or MOA with Taiwan to try to get educators from Taiwan to come to the United States. Well, we should be doing that with Spain and Costa Rica and other countries to bring in Spanish teachers. The vacancies exist. There's no one to be hired. We're burning our current educators out by asking them to cover numerous vacancies with extras or additional stipends, or we call them 20% in our district because it's how the contract works. But they're taking on a 6th or 7th class and they're getting paid additionally, great, but they're being burned out at the same time. And they're sometimes exiting faster. At the same time, pensions is then challenging us for using people for extra sections because they don't want to pay a higher pension. It's lunacy, but it's what's happening in the field.
So what can we do? Because this is a major issue for the state. What can we do to increase? I guess it's twofold. How do we get more students, kids, maybe from high school,
Right,
interested in going into the field of education? It is a great field. I mean, obviously you've made a career out of it. So how do we get more students in there so we can start to build up those programs? And how do we get more people maybe from overseas? As you said, you kind of alluded to that. Let's start with this, getting kids more interested in the field of education.
Well, it's Teachers Appreciation Week. I mean, one thing we need to do is appreciate the hell out of our teachers and really love and respect the work they do for the students they serve. And you do that a lot of different ways. You can do that through compensation. You can do that through benefits. You can do that through the culture and climate in your schools, in the relationships that you build. You can do that lots of different ways. But the 2% hard cap on the salary and 2% plus allowances, but districts can only move but so far. So you have about 100 districts getting gutted with S2 legislation, seeing huge class size jumps. I mean, one of the ways I'm hiring, honestly, is because there's other districts letting their teachers go because of S2 loss. And I'm gaining, the market is gaining some of their teachers, but their class sizes are ridiculously high. 30, 32 in a class, 35 in an elementary class. The legislation and the DOE have to recognize that we're not producing enough. So how do you encourage more? Has to be something about finance. Like, what would encourage someone to go into a field? Whether it's loan forgiveness, whether it's some kind of debt relief, whether it's some kind of scholarship towards, if you're going into a profession where you're spending $40,000, $50,000 a year in tuition so that you can graduate and make 57 and then pay for your benefits and work to 65, that's not really a real encouraging outcome, right? And that doesn't inspire folks into the field. So what can we do to try to, oh, and by the way, we want to go to universal pre-K. And when you add 90,000 3-year-olds and 90,000 4-year-olds, you're adding 180,000 potential children to be served with a 15 student cap by code, which means you need 12,000 educators, 12,000 additional teachers, let alone paras, child study team, counselors, nurses, administrators, and facilities, right, for 3 and 4-year-olds. So it doesn't even make sense what we're doing right now. And I believe in universal pre-K, but I believe in funding K-12 first, right? So we're jumping to solve so many issues at once that we're taking the eye off the prize. We've yet to have a hearing in front of the Joint Committee on the Governor's Task Force report. Thank goodness that Assemblywoman Lampett served on the Governor's Task Force and has introduced a slew of bills, because if it wasn't for her legislative initiatives and that of her support of her aide, Chris Nelson, I don't know where we'd be. We really need to get the legislature to understand that students and communities are being devastated. We can't find, and parents often, like, I'm a parent of 5 kids, 3 in the public school system still. And when my children don't have a teacher or have had a vacancy, my daughter didn't have a teacher for 5 months this year because the teacher was out on leave and they couldn't find a replacement. I don't blame the district. I know the issue, but I'm an informed parent. Other parents, you're limping through with a substitute, right? So it's very difficult in the grand scheme of things. This is not a short-term fix. It requires actually taking the governor's task force report, having hearing after hearing on it, and trying to figure out how to solve this both short and long term. So short term, you have to continue to extend the ability for retirees to work. You need to continue to extend the length of time that substitutes can work. You need to allow the borders to be open to bring teachers in.
Yeah, we can get back to that, because that was an initiative that affected a lot of districts that border
Yeah.
along the Delaware River and also New York border and actually down even in Delaware.
I mean, 50% of the states within 10 miles of a border, right? And we're taking a potential applicant pool away.
For those who don't know, to be a teacher or public worker in New Jersey, you have to live in New Jersey. So for a lot of districts, and I know I've talked to some of them, in those districts, that was like 30-40% of their pool came from out of state.
Absolutely. Look, we have to eliminate barriers that don't make sense. So one is this idea that you have to live in the state. Because what ends up happening is there's a waiver request. The vast majority of folks that apply for the waiver get granted the waiver. So the legislature's holding on to something that's not even upheld because waivers get granted. But what they do is they create a perceived block for folks that live across the border that they can't apply because they don't want to have to think about moving in a year. So why would you ever apply? But if they applied, got hired, and applied for the waiver, chances are they get it. So what are we doing? Right? There's another barrier that we should immediately eliminate, which is the praxis core. And if we go towards the back of the slide deck, probably 4 from the back, 5 from the back, there's one about the praxis core. And just what's really important about this particular data point is that the praxis core is one of the assessments that individuals need to take in college in order to go before they go into student teaching. And there's a failure rate in the praxis core. It's the core battery, right? So forgive the glasses, but I'm reading from a screen here. There's a 64%, 65% first time pass rate. Okay, and then look at the providers, the overall is 100%. That does not mean that 100% actually apply. That means of those that stay in the program, there's 100% pass rate, right? But there are kids that walk away and never take it. And it disproportionately impacts future educators of color, Black and brown students that exit the field. In fact, there's a 30% walk-away rate at the elementary level, right? And so we're creating our own shortages with arbitrary barriers. Now, someone would say, well, of course I want someone in the field to pass the praxis core. Yeah, but there's other barriers. They have to go through coursework. They have to go through student teaching, and they have to pass the praxis upon graduation, for certification. There's subject area, and it's different by content. They still have to pass a test. This is before they even student teach. So we're losing folks in the midst of their undergraduate coursework, and they walk away from the field. Then you go on and say, okay, where are the other places that make no sense, right? So time after time, we put up these barriers. We've changed the GPA to a 3 from a 2.75. What did that really do in the overall? A lot of times what we see is the first year students struggle in transition, and then that 2.75 was, they saw it as too low of a bar. You know, I'm more interested in their education GPA, not that they struggled as an 18-year-old in their first semester, and that struggle then damned them to be an educator when they're 22, right? So that barrier makes no sense to me. We're stopping folks. So you can see someone with a 3.5 in major, but an overall 2.8, and now they can't become an educator.
And then you mentioned all the number of certificated teacher or eligible students, but that doesn't mean they're all going into the field of education. We kind of lose people along the way, right, because maybe they don't feel it's the right, or maybe they're not getting enough support. Is there something we can do to
well, this is a
keep more of it?
This is a national problem. For every 5 educators, for every statistically, in the first 5 years, if we look at it in 5 educators, 1 never goes into the profession. Of the remaining 4, 1 exits by the time they are 5 years in, and the other 3 remain. So our 5-year retention rate is about 60%. This has been a national number for decades. So you have to ask why, but it also gets into another reason why the volume of folks in the pipeline has to be bolstered. And you have to keep finding ways to expand the pipeline. And on the other end, retain individuals that have committed to the profession and honor and respect them, right? And, you know, I have a sneaky suspicion for a doctoral study, which is studying educators' children and how many of them have go on to become educators Whereas years gone by, it was like everyone had family members that were educators, and that's why they became an educator. I don't see that happening at the same results anymore. I really think we have to
I can give you a
look
good
at
example that my daughter was thinking about becoming a teacher, and you know who talked her out of it?
you.
Teachers.
Oh,
No, I didn't talk her out. I was talking her into it.
mine's going to art school. So, I mean, to be an artist. So she's not going to become an art teacher, right? And so, and maybe one day, you know, there's honor in the profession. Now, if we could just flip one more slide beyond where we just were, I just think this slide helps with some recent data. And all this is this is the New Jersey Department of Ed performance report for educators. So every year, the college providers, the EPPs, as all the universities are known, have to provide data. And this is the breakdown of certifications. And the full reports online, you can find them all the way back to like 2013. But if you just look at, this is the last 2022, so the look back goes into prior years. But if you look at that's the number of certified count individuals is 22,195, of which they said employed as of a snapshot date. So that's really important because that more could be employed after the fact. But at that date, which is the ASSA date, basically 1,600 were applied. But look at the number of certs across the board. Phys ed's misleading if you're looking there and saying there's one, because there's another area on another page that's health and phys ed, and there's more obviously. But look at teacher of earth science right on the bottom.
Yeah.
As a state, we only graduated 4 students as teachers of earth science in 2021.
Yeah, and chemistry was only 12.
Well, I need 3 chemistry teachers next year, right? So when you start looking at this, the same thing happens with STEM. TC&J shutting their STEM program. They were the only ones in the area that did that. There is no program in the state of New Jersey that offers family consumer science, yet it's a graduation requirement. You know, there are requirements with no one offering the programs. Computer science certs are going to be required in 2 years. Well, where are those teachers coming from? They don't have them, right? So, you know, when you're a state and you're looking at look at the way we get into the myopic middle school 5.8 certs, the specialties for social studies and sciences and what the whole there are districts that have that, you know,
Many openings.
Look, if I'm Newark, I'm hiring 600 teachers a year, right? And that doesn't mean they have massive turnover. It just means they have a massive district, right? You know, so when you have these kind of numbers, we're not producing enough of any category to meet the demands of the market. In fact, we've increased the market by adding in pre-K, because now you need the pre-K 3 cert. And so what a lot of the colleges are doing is switching to pre-K 3, and they're not offering the K5 anymore. So we're going to have an upper elementary challenge in a couple of years. And then when the codes came out, they really didn't listen to the feedback from the field. And there's things that could happen under Chapter 9 to help broaden this. So look, I mean, it's complex. And if we could just maybe flip to the last slide, because I do think the last slide also is part of the story. This last slide is looking at data regarding public educators over time. And this is, again, you have to have a lot of look back data on this particular one. Mm-hmm. So it's the cohort total, but it's going back to 14-15 to 17-18. The employment 1 year postgraduate and the employment 2 years postgrad. Look at the drop off between year 1 and 2. And so when we start talking about the number of people producing certs and the number that went into the field, it's less than 50%, right? And then after 2 years, how they're staying. This is prior data. This is all pre-COVID.
And it hasn't gotten better since.
It's only gone worse. Yeah. In fact, our numbers are nowhere near 5,000.
So this is, we're coming towards the end of our time. So this is going to have to be a statewide. Districts, I said this before, I'll just repeat. A district can't solve the problem stuff. They can make themselves more competitive against their other districts. But we're going to need a statewide program, and it's probably going to take some time to have that short-term help and then the long-term way of getting people into the field.
Look, yes. And so we have no choice but to look long-term, short-term. So there's short-term fixes and ways we can try to open the pipeline, and then there's long-term viability of the field. And so, as a representative from the New Jersey Association of School Administrators, I had to get that right. And working on the task force, as I said, we finished that task force report. It was not a consensus document. January of last year. It's now May, so 16 months later. No hearing, not one hearing. We did add money to the budget in order to help a fee forgiveness time period. And we did have money added for paraprofessionals to go to like alternate route, but that money's all gone at the end of June this year. So that task force report had to mean more than just that budget. There's a long-term challenge in front of us as a state, and we need the legislature, we need the governor, and we need all the associations to work together to help solve this. And we have to be working with our college partners in order to understand. A lot of times I find that there's a misunderstanding and translation between what the universities and colleges have to do for certification and how they have to build their programs, and then what's happening in the legislature, and then how they get the students that are graduating to us. It's complex, and it's bigger than just saying there's an educator shortage.
Yeah, and it took us years to get into this mess. Mess. I
It
shouldn't
is a
say
mess.
that.
It's the right word.
But it's going to take us some time to get out.
It's
And
a
so-
decade
but
plus
we have
to
to
fix
start.
it. It doesn't, every
Make it a
year we
priority.
don't address it. It's another year for the delay.
Okay, that brings us to the end of this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I don't think this will be our last conversation on teacher shortage. If I could guess, I'd like to thank David Aderhold for his presentation and his insights. I've always enjoyed them. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you want, you can reach out to me and I'll give you some follow-up information.
Thanks for having me, Ray.